It was the sharp hiss of running water, not the oppressive Arizona heat, that jerked me from sleep that July morning. At first, I dismissed it as Doc's ancient irrigation timer acting up again, but when I stumbled outside in my faded denim robe and cracked leather slippers, half awake and wholly irritated, I discovered something that turned my mild annoyance into scorching rage. A thick garden hose, industrial grade and brand new, was snaking through a hole beneath my back fence like some venomous serpent, draining my water tank as if it had been parched for centuries. My groggy eyes traced its emerald coils until they landed on none other than Karen Jenkins, our neighborhood's self-appointed guardian, standing in a patch of sunlight that seemed to highlight her sense of entitlement. She was drowning her prized marigolds with enough water to baptize an army, waving at me as if this bizarre scene was completely normal. That's when the 2-week mystery clicked into place. For 14 maddening days, water pressure on the Double Creek property had been as unpredictable as my cousin Betty's mood swings. Some mornings, turning on the kitchen tap produced nothing but angry sputters, like my Uncle Tommy with his chewing tobacco. Other times, the livestock troughs filled at half their normal rate, while the pump wheezed like an asthmatic trying to climb stairs. I blamed it on summer strain, convinced the lines needed flushing, or perhaps the solar backup wasn't storing enough juice. Hell, I'd even called in my nephew Dave, the one who quit plumbing to become a video game streamer once he discovered how much money he could make sitting at home in his pajamas. Nothing added up until that serpentine hose revealed the truth. Standing barefoot on the red dirt, arms folded across my chest, I watched the realization boil inside me like the old kettle Grandma left me. Karen Jenkins had been stealing my water, and this wasn't some desperate act of a thirsty farmer. This was calculated, systematic theft. Karen ruled our HOA board like some benevolent dictator. Her rules were gospel. Trash bins vanished by 6 p.m. sharp. Lawns remained as precisely cut as a military buzz cut. Hedges dared not exceed 36 inches. And God help any child who drew on the sidewalk with chalk. But when it came to her own property, rules became suggestions, and suggestions transformed into sermons she preached with the fervor of a televangelist. Her lawn was the greenest patch in the entire Southwest. Her garden glowed like something from Southern Living magazine, and her sprinklers, they flowed like Niagara Falls had taken up residence in her backyard. Later that afternoon, I walked the fence line with the focused intensity of a detective at a crime scene. Not a word to Karen. No dramatic confrontations or accusatory shouts over the gate. Just careful observation, noting how the hose threaded through a hole that hadn't existed last month. The water flow was steady. No kinks, no breaks. This wasn't some makeshift connection. She created a direct siphon, transforming petty theft into industrial-scale larceny. The next morning, motivated by a mixture of paranoia honed by decades of rural living and a burning need for justice, I set my trap. That old trail camera in the barn, the one I'd used to catch the neighbor kid stealing vegetables, found a new home inside a hollowed-out birdhouse, positioned at the perfect angle to capture any activity near the valve junction. That night, my makeshift surveillance system lit up like Times Square at midnight. The footage was better than I'd hoped. There was Karen's handyman, some poor soul who sweated more than he thought, crawling through the shadows with a pipe wrench clamped between his teeth like some discount spy. He disconnected a pressure lock I'd forgotten even existed, opened a hidden valve, attached a professional T-splitter, and reinforced the hose connecting directly to Karen's garden paradise. When I zoomed in on the timestamp, my suspicions crystallized into cold, hard facts. This operation had been running for at least 10 straight nights. Every time I slept soundly or attended those endless town hall meetings debating whether chickens counted as farm animals, Karen was operating her private waterworks off my back. Confronting her required strategy, not anger. The next afternoon, armed with a calm smile and a flash drive containing the incriminating footage, I stood at her door. She opened it like I'd interrupted high tea, though her frazzled hair and the garden hose she wielded like a weapon suggested otherwise. "Karen," I said politely, "I've noticed a hose crossing the property line. I'd appreciate it if you remove it." She laughed, actually laughed, like I'd told her my livestock were running for governor. "Must be some weird neighborhood plumbing quirk, Jim." You should bring it up with the HOA. By morning, my inbox contained an official email from the HOA, a citation for unauthorized accusations and causing unrest within the neighborhood. Karen had weaponized the very rules she supposedly protected, twisting them like everything else in her perfectly manicured grasp. My response required precision. The local hardware store yielded exactly what I needed: a high-pressure cube-off valve, a state-of-the-art pressure regulator, and a custom wooden sign that proclaimed private property. Water supply monitored. Next, I called in a favor from Roy Martinez at the county utilities office. I'd helped him rebuild his barn roof during that hellacious windstorm last spring, nearly losing my own footing in the process. Who really owns the utility line beneath our lots? I asked him directly. The files revealed a truth sweeter than Karen's stolen water. During the drought 15 years prior, I'd agreed to let my personal well system serve as emergency overflow for the HOA line. But here's the kicker. Those agreements required written permission and maintenance contracts, both of which had expired 6 years ago. More importantly, Karen had tapped into the same line that quietly supplied half the street during peak hours. In her greedy attempt to water her kingdom, she hadn't just stolen from me. She'd siphoned from her own supporters, all while blaming city incompetence, climate change, and everyone except herself. If I wanted to cut off her marigolds, I'd be shutting down water for half the HOA. That decision practically made itself. The morning after discovering the full scope of Karen's water heist, I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and watch the sun crawl over the ridge. Too peaceful out there, like nature itself was holding its breath. Birds chirped their morning psalms, the breeze whispered through leaves, and somewhere in the distance, Karen's sprinklers still hissed their steady rhythm. Meanwhile, my animals drank from rationed buckets while I brushed my teeth with bottled water, like some city tourist camping in his own backyard. I spread everything across my kitchen table: trail cam footage, expired HOA agreements, pressure logs showing suspicious spikes every time her system activated. Still, something nagged at me. Where was all this water going? Her garden was green, sure, but not large enough to justify such massive consumption. Then I remembered the new homes on Sagebrush Avenue. They had all suffered water issues last summer. Karen had personally promised those neighbors better pressure this year. Could she have expanded her operation beyond theft into full-blown water racketeering? Curiosity became obsession. I retraced the property lines, taking the long route through the wooded path separating lots. There it was, a secondary hose branching from the main line, snaking through yards like an underground network. It slithered beneath decorative rocks, behind manicured shrubs, even through a drainage culvert disguised as landscaping. Each connection led to someone else's property. At least 4 other homes, all HOA members, all managed by Karen's carefully cultivated relationships. She created her own utility empire using my water, running a full-scale operation. The confirmation came at the mailbox later that afternoon. Mrs. Thompson from 3 doors down praised Karen as a local hero, crediting her with solving their pressure problems. Even mentioned paying her a small monthly fee for the improved irrigation service. My jaw clenched so tight I nearly cracked a molar. Karen was charging people for stolen water, and they thanked her for it. That evening, I called Roy again. After 20 years at the county water office, Roy knew every pipe and pressure valve in the state. She's running a full-scale operation, I explained, laying out the photographic evidence. 4 houses minimum, plus her own. Roy whistled long and low. If those old agreements have expired and they're still drawing off your system, that's not just theft. It's trespassing every time they turn on a faucet. He promised to visit the next day with diagnostic equipment and legal documentation that might prove useful. While waiting for Roy, I made subtle preparations. Cutting off water completely would cause panic and warn Karen, so instead I installed a hidden flow restrictor deep within the pipe junction. The effect was subtle but immediate. Karen's emerald lawn began showing patches of yellow. Her hydrangeas drooped imperceptibly, and her fountain reduced to a pitiful dribble. By day 4, her patience cracked like the drought-stricken earth. I heard her screaming from her yard, phone pressed to her ear, ranting about water pressure being unacceptable, and clearly sabotaged. The HOA's response arrived by mail, another accusation, this time for disrupting the community water balance, hoarding resources, and intentionally interfering with neighborhood beautification efforts. They gave me 7 days to resolve the pressure disparity or face additional fines. I copied everything, organized it into a folder labeled Evidence, and waited for Roy's arrival. 2 days later, Roy pulled up in his county truck, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the morning sun as he sipped convenience store coffee. One look at the valve setup drew another whistle from him. "Jim, she's not just stealing. She's playing with fire," he said, gesturing to the connections. "If that pump fails or pressure spikes, the whole system could backflow and flood the junction box. We're talking thousands in damage, potential contamination. Can we lock it down without causing system failure?" I asked. He nodded, pulling out his toolkit. Together, we spent an hour installing a secure shut-off valve on my side of the tank, one that required a special key I now kept. We added a pressure monitor with digital logging and a remote sensor that would alert my phone whenever flow spiked. This wasn't just about protecting my water anymore. It was about building an ironclad case. The following morning, I dressed as always, worn jeans, work boots, and the straw hat my grandfather had passed down. Perfect timing caught Karen loading mulch bags into her SUV, looking as frazzled as her dying lawn. "Having some trouble with your garden?" I asked innocently. She squinted at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "The city says there's an issue with the grid. Some unexpected slowdown in supply." "That's a shame," I nodded sympathetically. "You should really check your hoses. Improper connections can cause serious backflow problems." She slammed her car door without another word and sped off like she was late for an execution. That evening brought the turning point. One of the neighbors, the Williams family from Lot 22, called me confused. Their sprinklers had run dry, and Karen blamed city sabotage investigation. "Did you ever sign anything allowing her to run irrigation across property lines?" I asked gently. "No," he admitted. "She just said she handled it." Within hours, whispers spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The throne Karen had built from stolen water began to crumble, and with it, the carefully constructed illusions she'd maintained for years. 3 days after Roy installed my security measures, I was sipping coffee on the porch at sunrise when my phone buzzed. The alert was simple but damning. Water surge detected. Opening the app, I saw the evidence. A pressure spike so violent it nearly maxed out the system. Someone was forcing the issue, and I knew exactly who. Heart steady, I walked to the valve junction. The lock remained intact, but fresh scratch marks scarred the metal surface, desperate attempts with the wrong tools. My trail camera had captured everything. Karen in black leggings and a hoodie, playing amateur spy with a flashlight between her teeth, fumbling with tools until a startled raccoon sent her tumbling backward into her fence. Time for official action. The sheriff's non-emergency line connected me with Deputy Williams, a young officer who still believed in the basic goodness of people. I showed him everything: footage, documents, Roy's certification, the works. "This is serious," he said, photographing evidence. "Tampering with utility infrastructure without permits. We'll be following up immediately." As he left, he offered advice that struck deep. "Most folks would have shut everything down already. You're letting her dig her own hole. That's rare wisdom, sir." The next day, Karen's empire collapsed entirely. The flow restrictor finally choked her unauthorized connections to the point of uselessness. Phone calls poured in from affected neighbors. First Mr. Patol, then the Johnsons, then the elderly couple on Lot 16. They'd all been paying Karen for improved water service, believing their money supported legitimate upgrades. Karen arrived at my gate that evening like a dust devil in polyester, spewing accusations of sabotage and drought-making. When I suggested calm discussion, she refused, screaming about lawsuits and ordinances before kicking my fence rail and storming home. That night, I reviewed the footage again, this time laughing at the absurdity. The Water Queen's empire, built on theft and deception, was washing away with her stolen flow. Morning brought not another citation but an invitation. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting to address water irregularities and neighborhood unrest. The power had shifted irreversibly. Karen entered the community center wearing a crimson blazer and manufactured confidence, carrying printed materials for another of her infamous speeches about community responsibility. She didn't anticipate my preparation. When she finished her performance, I stood, walked forward, and methodically laid out the evidence: photographs, diagrams, security footage of her midnight trespassing, expired contract documentation certified by Roy himself. The footage of her tampering with my equipment played on the projector screen while the room fell silent. "Can you verify this evidence?" the board chair asked. "Absolutely," I confirmed, presenting the official county documentation Roy had prepared. Karen's denials rang hollow in the face of overwhelming proof. The board voted immediately. Her leadership position terminated pending full investigation. She fled without a word, her supporters trailing behind in shame. No celebration followed my vindication. Instead, quiet gratitude filled the room as neighbors nodded their respect. I returned the acknowledgement, feeling only relief that justice had finally prevailed. Walking home under evening skies, I passed Karen's wilting property, yellowing lawn, dropping flower beds, silent fountain. She watched from her window as I passed, arms crossed in defeat, but spoke no words of defiance. The aftermath was quiet but charged with change. Karen's house sat wounded and obvious, no longer the neighborhood's crown jewel, but its cautionary tale. Her garden withered while mine prospered with honest water, properly used. Recovery came through action. I spent days at the county records office investigating the water system's legal foundation. Hours among musty files revealed critical details. My grandfather's original agreement for emergency overflow had expired after 10 years, never renewed. The water system, legally and completely, belonged to me alone. Knowledge brought power, and power required responsibility. I commissioned a new sign: private water supply, access by permission only, mounted beside the valve box. The message was clear without being vindictive. When the HOA's new representative arrived with proposals for renewed access, I presented my terms: public apology, refunded stolen fees, premium water rates, and transparent agreements. They had a week to decide. The neighborhood transformed as truth spread. Former supporters distanced themselves from Karen's legacy, while others approached me privately, apologetic and embarrassed. I offered individual arrangements, making it clear I wasn't interested in profit, only fairness and sustainability. A local reporter caught wind of the story. I agreed to an interview on one condition: factual reporting without sensationalism. We sat in my backyard, cameras pointed at the tanks and wildflower plots I'd maintained since childhood. The resulting article ran with the title, "The Water Guardian: One Man's Stand Against Suburban Theft." 3 days of solitude followed before Karen reappeared, visibly diminished. Gone was the commanding presence. In its place stood uncertainty and regret. She approached my fence while I tended to morning chores. "I came to apologize," she said quietly. "I know what I did was wrong." I considered her words carefully before responding. "It's not about forgiveness now, Karen. It's about fixing what's broken and ensuring it never happens again." She nodded, eyes downcast, before retreating to her fading sanctuary. The HOA's formal vote came weeks later. Following proper procedure, they removed Karen permanently after investigating her other questionable dealings. The new chair, Helen Garcia, approached me with a different attitude entirely. "We want to make this right," she said, outlining a fair contract proposal with transparent oversight and community benefits. This time, when the agreement was signed, every gallon would be monitored, every payment tracked, and every drop used for the community's betterment. We established a sustainable framework, not just for water sharing, but for future resource management. The summer solstice brought unexpected opportunities. A county conservation officer, impressed by my system's efficiency, offered a formal partnership for emergency drought response. Unlike Karen's secretive operation, this would be legal, compensated, and beneficial for everyone. The neighborhood evolved rapidly. Community gardens sprouted from donated plots, water-efficient landscaping replaced thirsty lawns, and educational workshops taught sustainable practices. The HOA board, now operating with transparency, invited resident participation in decision-making. One evening in late summer, I mounted the certificate the county awarded me, Steward of the Source, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that natural resources demand respect and community assets require protection. Karen remained in her home, a shadow of her former self. Occasionally, our paths crossed, silent encounters acknowledging shared history without hostility. Her garden recovered slowly using properly purchased water, a visible reminder of lessons learned. The water system I protected became a model for sustainable neighborhood management. Flow meters tracked every drop, resident education promoted conservation, and emergency protocols ensured fairness during shortages. What began as theft transformed into a template for community cooperation. Late that autumn, sitting on my grandfather's porch rocker, I reflected on the journey. The water flowing through properly maintained pipes no longer carried the weight of stolen secrets or broken trust. Instead, it nourished a neighborhood that had finally learned the difference between cooperation and control. As winter approached, conversations around the community garden's harvest spoke of more than vegetables and flowers. They discussed respect, boundaries, and the delicate balance between individual rights and collective responsibility. Karen, when mentioned at all, served as a cautionary tale rather than a person to hate. The final chapter wrote itself one crisp December morning. A developer approached with offers to buy properties for luxury development. The neighborhood, united by our water wars, declined collectively. They'd learned that true value wasn't measured in real estate prices, but in community strength forged through adversity. I maintained my position as the quiet guardian of shared resources, not because I sought power, but because someone needed to ensure the mistakes of the past never repeated. The water tank hummed efficiently, the garden thrived with measured irrigation, and neighbors treated each other with the respect born from hard-earned understanding. In the end, Karen's attempt to steal my water had stolen something else entirely, the illusion that neighborhoods run on rules alone. We discovered they actually run on trust, transparency, and the willingness to hold each other accountable. And that realization quenched a thirst deeper than any irrigation system could satisfy. The sound of properly flowing water became the neighborhood's heartbeat, steady, sustainable, and shared by all who earned the right to drink from its source.